Thanks, everybody. Let me start by thanking the Academy of Finland and the Department of History and Ethnology here at the University of Jyväskylä. Professor Stark, thanks very much for inviting me, and thanks to everybody for a great couple days and wonderful give and take both in the sessions and in lunches and such. And it's just a treat and a pleasure to be with everybody, so thanks very much. The ideas I have are still they're very much in progress, so there may be a couple points where I bounce back and forth or I waffle. Please feel to catch me on them or ask questions. And again, I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to share some of these thoughts with you. And hopefully I'm going to do some integration, just a bit about some of the things that we've heard and discussed over the last couple days. That said, it was parallel sessions, so I didn't get to see everybody's stuff, so it's not like I'm going to try to do a line-by-line summary of the conference, but I'm hoping we can do some of that together in the session that follows the movie and this one. So everybody's internet is now a question, but I do just want to talk today about mobile data and what the arrival of mobile data on most people's handsets around the world what are those implications for us as researchers, whether you are interested in mobile communication in the global south or mobiles for development or anything in between. So just one more word or two on my affiliation is I do work for Microsoft Research, which means I spend most of my time writing papers and doing studies and working with colleagues in the academy and other places. So I'm not giving you Microsoft's opinion on any of this stuff over the next hour or so. This is research similar to what most of you would do. But our job, our lab's job, which is based in Bangalore, is to understand users in various developing communities around the world, to design where possible for those communities, and with an eye specifically on socioeconomic development. We're trying to build stuff that helps. And we do that through collaborations with industry and with NGOs and with development organizations and the academy. And we've done studies around the world. I happen to be doing some of these down here, but most of our work has been India focused. So let me just start with some quotes to sort of set the frame here. Jeff Sachs, who's a famous economist, said a few years ago that the cell phone is the single most transformative technology for development. Mobile communication has arguably had a bigger impact on humankind in a shorter period of time than any other invention in human history. And this is from the folks who wrote the World Bank's ICT report for last year, for 2012. And again, there's some enthusiasm about the mobile phone there and mobile communication. Robin Jeffrey and Asa Doran, sort of area studies anthropology scholars working in South Asia, said when describing India that the mobile or cell phone has radically changed the potential for political organization in India, perhaps more noticeably there than anywhere else in the world. So not only is it something that's radically changing the world, but it may be particularly changing the developing world. And this brings right back to the opening keynote, and actually both the keynotes where we started to play around these ideas of change, but certainly these quotes are out there. Against that, all of those quotes just were about the mobile phone or mobile communication. And now let's kind of think about what mobile data does to that. I'm not going to overwhelm you with statistics, but look, there's probably 1 billion people coming online now or soon who will do so through their handset as opposed to through a PC. And everybody from industry to academics knows that the mobile internet is coming in some form. So Morgan Stanley, not that I quote all my academic research from Morgan Stanley, but they got this early. And they said, for many emerging market users and small and medium businesses, the internet will be mobile. The industry gets this and is building a mobile internet literally for the whole world or for parts of the world. What do we do with this? It is growing faster than the conventional landline internet. So one thing you can do is extrapolate, right? And so now we've got mobile data, we've got mobile phones everywhere, and if you're not careful, you end up with quotes like this, which is from IBM research, saying, in our global society, the wealth of economies are decided by the level of access to information. And in 5 years, the gap between the information haves and have-nots will cease to exist due to the advent of mobile technology. It's quite the claim, right? But that's the one pole of the understanding of what this is doing to the world right now. Obviously, probably, any one of you has things to say back to comments like this, and hopefully the remainder of the talk will be a little bit of a reflection of that. So I think that part of the problem is the basic phone call. It's it works. $10 handset, most parts of the world, you can make a phone call and get to anybody else who's got a $10 handset. And a $10 handset makes a phone call just about as well as a $500 handset does. And I think the concern is that we're going to try to map that same level of ubiquity and success and ease of use to the mobile internet. And I'm really not sure that we're going to get there without a lot of help and a lot of emphasis on making sure it's fair. So the themes for today are that data is coming, and that our theory and our practice really about mobiles in the global south it has to account for this, if not now, then quite soon. And second, and this is what I offer as kind of a lens to do this. This is not the only way to do this. This is not the only lens you could use, but the lens I want to use is if you're going to talk about the mobile internet, one way to get a lot of traction on what it means and how it's useful and how it's not is to think about it as a central part of a digital repertoire of ways to access the internet, but not just talk about it in isolation. So I'm going to use repertoire a lot during the rest of the talk. So one thing I need to do before I get into the repertoire thing is just talk about the mobile internet. And this is something where I think I differ from some other people about what I think the mobile internet is. There's actually different types of mobile internet. I think it's helpful to know which one we're talking about at a given time. The one we usually think about is our sort of core mobile internet experience, which is a nice 3G connection and a touch screen and a smartphone. You can do an awful lot with that. People say, well, that's broadband, that's mobile broadband, that's where we're all headed. And granted, yes, that's coming, but not everybody has that internet experience yet on their phone. A lot of people have 2G or a little feature phone, an old WAP browser. Maybe can do a .mobi site, but couldn't do anything heavy, couldn't watch a YouTube video or anything, but can get to the internet. And in fact, many, many, many phones, the vast majority of phones in the world, have that capability shipped on it, whether people are using it or not. And there was one of the talks from the folks earlier today about, well, there's a big difference between use and access, and I agree. But at least the phones are data enabled. But then there's actually other ways to think about mobile internet, which is really, if you stretch it a bit, any phone, anything that's connected to the public switch network, any mobile phone, can manipulate the internet. It can read and write to data sets through the voice channel, for example, like IVR, interactive voice response, or audio wikis. And this is not to say that everybody does it, but hypothetically, you could dial a number on your phone and listen to synthesized speech that would be reading something from the internet. And in this way, and then also look, even if you don't have a handset of your own, maybe your cousin's got one. So when we start to think about that, and these are very rough numbers, when we start to think about like how far the internet has kind of diffused through the world, if we take this kind of more generous definition, the only people in the world who are completely, we know, not ever going to touch the internet yet are the 15% of the people of the population that doesn't live under a signal. 85% of the world lives under a voice signal, and almost that same 85 lives under a 2G signal. Right now, about 50% of the world lives under a 3G signal. This is by population, and that is growing quickly as well. And so, maybe 10% of the world actually enjoys a core smartphone experience right now, and mobile internet as we would all like to imagine it. But you could stretch it out and say that the internet is much broader than that. And just to pre-shadow a bit, I don't think that the way people not in this room but who write about the internet spend much time thinking about these compromised experiences at all. So, and I don't even think the ICTD people think enough about them, to be honest with you. This is Information and Communication Technologies for Development, which is another kind of multidisciplinary community that I spent some time working with and writing with. I think that this is our archetype, this is our dream, and this is the thing that we imagine when we're talking about a cell phone. And rightly so, because it is still the phone that most people use, and particularly the phones that still get used in the settings where a lot of you are doing your field work and your research. But in terms of what's getting sort of pushed into the pipeline, it's hard to buy this phone anymore. Almost every single phone, some people say 95% of the phones that are being manufactured and shipped have at least some sort of data connection on them. So pretty soon, well, not as soon as, thanks Nokia, because these things will last forever, but the phones, the percentage of people who've got phones that will touch the internet in some way is undoubtedly on the rise, even in the global south. Price point, let's talk about under $50. And look, you can buy an Android handset right now, $75 or $80 or $100, and in a few more years that'll be $50, and that's still not cheap enough for, I know, a lot of people in the world, but give it a little bit of time and data is coming. So now, how do we understand this? I'm going to use repertoire, which has been used elsewhere in the human-computer interaction literature to talk about the sort of complete, and this is actually the lay definition of it, the complete list or supply of skills, devices, or ingredients used in a particular field, occupation, or practice. Toolbox, and what are the things in your toolbox? What this is not, and I know there's lots of ethnographers in the room, is this is not an information ecology. I'm not going to try to talk about all context at once. In fact, I'm doing kind of the opposite of what some of the earlier talks were about, which is really diving in and understanding, situated use. I'm going to try to make some assertions about the technology in general that literally billions of people are touching. So I want to stay tightly focused on the tools and the set of options that people have to manipulate digital data. Some people have $500 smartphones and a PC and a cloud account and a set-top box and 3 cameras and a tablet to manipulate their digital data that lives on the cloud. And some people have a $20 cell phone, and they're being asked to manipulate digital data on the cloud. So we got to figure that out. So repertoires. This is the thing. It's just one way to think about the beauty and the failing of the smartphone right now. So how many of you guys have smartphones? How many people have PCs? Okay, how many people are willing to give up their PC and just live on the smartphone? That's the problem, right? And so these beautiful devices are built as complements to an internet experience that also includes PCs and other ways of getting around. And then we talk about this thing about, now there's billions of data-enabled phones, isn't that great? But the difference between being somebody who's got a mix of tools and somebody who's being either mobile only or mobile primary. Mobile primary being, for example, you have a mobile phone that can touch data, but whenever you need to print something, you go to a shop, or you've got maybe your job or your school's got a couple computers, but you don't have one at home. That's a mobile primary type of internet use, and I think that sort of playing these categories against each other is very helpful for theorizing about what device are we talking about and what experience are we talking about. So one thing we don't know is how these things sit. I mean, I didn't populate those cells with numbers because nobody's actually gone out and figured it out exactly. But your kind of experience with the PC is somewhat independent of your experience on the mobile phone. So you can be somebody who's mobile only. This is data from Tanzania, and this was just a couple years ago. Don't worry about the numbers; they're not really representative of anything. But we found this group called Audienscapes talked to a few thousand Tanzanians, some of whom had internet, and these were all the different ways that people touch the internet. And you start talking about these rings and these circles. Some people were mobile-centric. They had access to a PC outside their home, but they also used it on their mobile phone. The dotted line is everybody who used mobile internet. There's some other people who use PC internet. And we just have a tendency to lump them all together as if they have the same experience. So if we relax that a little bit and we start thinking about mobile-only experiences, some interesting things start to happen about what's kind of inbound for exploration. And so this is my colleague, Nimin Rangaswamy, who's also at the Microsoft Research Lab in India, is doing work with mostly teenage and young sort of young 20s and teenage boys in very low-income neighborhoods, slums basically, in Hyderabad and Mumbai, who use their mobiles to touch Facebook and really don't use Facebook in any other form than their mobile. And they're not that rare. Facebook itself says that they've got 157 million users who only touch Facebook through their mobile phone. And that's out of 1.06 billion users last quarter. And that ratio is growing, right? So this kind of mobile-first, mobile-only modes of use are growing. And that puts a lot of things we need to understand kind of this as a mobile communication in the Global South question, and that's got implications for the guys who think about development as well. How do we understand whether this has got any kind of development impact or not? And we could do a different talk on why I do think it does. But you can see how the question set opens up a little bit when you account for data on the handsets. And I've had conversations with some of you about this over the last couple of days. So why do we care? I think I already did this. I made you guys raise your hand and say whether you could keep your phone or not. So a couple other things beyond the interface, right? And that it's nicer to have, if you want to write a long email, you wait until you're home in front of your PC, right? There's another thing you do, which is you wait until you're in a place where you're not paying for the bit, buy the bit. And we've talked about prepay a lot. Anybody who talks about mobile communication in the Global South understands prepay, because that's the governing force of when you use and how you use and why you beep and why you're careful and how you meter your time and how you budget yourself, because you pay by the minute. The internet that we've accidentally ended up with around the world is also going to be pay as you go, pay by the minute. And this is in opposition to the metaphors that came out of the kind of utopian ideas of the internet as something you would surf and browse at your heart's content. I would love if the World Health Organization could put a video online to help people, maybe understand, childbirth practices or something better. But you can't get people to pay for the download of the video, because the same sorts of cost pressures are going to come to the mobile internet that we understand from mobile data. From airtime. And this is why you see things like WhatsApp and Mixit in South Africa, and Viber was another one I guess I just heard about. These are these sort of very lean, very light kind of social network, but mostly just cheaper replacements for SMS, which in some ways are defining why people are getting on in the first place. They're figuring out their mobile internet connections to save money, because it's cheaper than making phone calls and it's cheaper than sending SMSs. That's the internet experience that many people have. So all in all, when you take these sort of cost factors and interface factors and repertoire factors together, I do think that that there's something to be said for the fact that yes, both somebody with a $500 laptop and a smartphone and somebody with a $20 data connection on a cheap phone are on the internet. I don't think it's the same internet. And that's got implications for social policy and all that. So what I want to do to kind of reinforce this is I want to go back through 3 studies that I was lucky enough to be a part of over a couple of years, none of which we were specifically looking at this question, but the sort of nature of the repertoire kind of comes out. So I wanted to revisit. So I'm going to revisit 3 studies and then go back and do some discussion and implications at the end, and hopefully have time for questions. So these are one on microenterprise, one on students and telecenters, and one on a citizen journalism platform. So the first one is the microenterprise stuff, which is one of the first things I got to write on in this space a number of years ago. I was very lucky to be able to be in Rwanda in 2004, got to interview a bunch of early adopters at that point about how they were using their phone. And then I followed up with more of the sort of similar work in India once I lived in India. And I got things like this. This is actually one from the very first round of interviews I did, and this guy was great, and he was my archetype. I loved talking about Innocent the baker, who claimed that he was confident that the phone, the plain old phone, helped him extend his business, get more customers, be in better touch with his customers, and he had like mad expansion plans. He was going to be the McDonald's of baking. And he's like one of hundreds of millions of successful stories of people talking to you about why the mobile is important to them. And so by 2007, I was saying, hey, what's next? What's going to come after the voice? I was saying, well, we're going to see some inventory management solutions. Maybe suppliers will give you a way to kind of manage your inventory online, even for the tiny businesses, or financial services and banking. Maybe Innocent and his crew could use it for consumer relations, like a CRM, customer relations management software, and advertising marketplaces. And look, all of these things are now coming true. They're not all coming from our lab, but they're all coming true, right? There are people trying to build systems to help microenterprises in each of these ways. Plus the systems like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and all that can be used by these guys as well. So the digitization of even small business is happening. But so now what I reflect is that what I'm concerned about is when you take a repertoire lens and you step back a little bit, is that what's next may also be Walmart. And so since 2007, there's been more liberalization and foreign direct investment in India, and a lot of the same guys I was talking to who ran a fruit stand are now in competition with much more sophisticated players who also will sell you fruit. And one of the things that makes the big business more competitive than the little guy is all the other types of information systems in addition to the mobile only, just the mobile phone, that make that business tick. Walmart and its ilk don't run their businesses on mobile phones. And it's not until you step back a little bit that you can ask these questions about, are these guys, no matter how great that sort of initial story is, this kind of informatization of the world and how every single transaction carries with it and throws off information, privileges people who have a better set of resources to manipulate that information. So this is like they know how many pairs they sell, and they know who walked in and who also bought a bucket of detergent, and they know how many pairs to buy next week in ways that no matter how much you privilege intuition, these other guys don't have if they're mobile only. So this is just one. I want to go through 3 of these and just kind of raise these interesting questions. I hope it's okay. I know I'm moving quickly. So the second one is something I just finished last year with Marion Walton, who's a professor at the University of Cape Town, where we looked at students in basically former township, sort of low-income neighborhoods around Cape Town who still were coming to telecenters in the afternoon. And we knew telecenters like public access. And this is, Araba's here. Araba's was involved, helped coordinate a multi-country, multi-year, very significant effort to understand public access and the role of public access in economic development, public access to the internet. And this piece was the mobiles piece that Marion and I helped do for Araba's team at the University of Washington. So we wanted to see, look, we knew that all the students that we would talk to, any 14-year-old in a telecenter, 15-year-old in a telecenter in Cape Town has access to the internet. A, because they're in the telecenter, but B, because they've all got phones with data on them. So we just asked, why are you still here? Why do we still need public access if you've got a mobile phone that's got data on it? And so, we did all the kind of normal, kind of quasi-ethnography stuff, and we did talk aloud exercises, and we learned about how people kind of manufacture their work, and a lot of this was around schoolwork. And at the end of the day, look, it's obvious, right? The stuff is still at the library, and they need to go to the library to print and browse for free and browse quickly. And the guys with internet in their pocket who will stand in line for an hour or more for a half-hour slot in the afternoon to get their homework done, and then print. And that doesn't line up with the rhetoric of the digital divide being closed because everybody has a mobile phone. So what do? We got to step back. We got to look at the phone and the phone's role and the role of data relative to these other options and simultaneously in the repertoire that these guys had, which was mobile primary. They all had access to both the PC and the mobile. Most of their digital life was through the mobile, except for printing and schoolwork. So we made some recommendations about, look, libraries need to reimagine their role to include mobile internet. And you could do things like giving away data in the same way that a hotspot in a coffee shop, and that's not free to do, but would make a huge difference to kids to be able to come in and upload and download to their phone, to store things on their phone, making printing easier, print to the phone. Don't print because you can put it on your phone. There's a variety of things you could do, big or small, to make that experience more empathetic to people who don't have a PC at home and are still kind of needing the PC for certain parts of production. Okay, the last one I want to talk about is a citizen journalism platform that my colleagues at Microsoft Research in India helped build for a group called CGNet. And so CGNet was in Chhattisgarh, which is a sort of central, relatively resource-constrained new state in central India, had a community of practitioners and journalists would get together on like what started as a Yahoo chat called CGNet to exchange stories and things and kind of do the work of citizen journalism in text form. What Bill Tees and a bunch of collaborators helped build was a voice portal to CGNet, which became CGNet Swara, I think being Hindi for voice. So what did we do with Swara, and what did we learn, and why is this relevant here? So we helped build the thing, and it's an IVR platform. It's based on something called IVR Junction, which is open source. You guys can download it, use it for citizen journalism or anything else you want to use it for. And that was like the contribution number one. Second contribution was figuring out what happened when people adopted it, and how was it actually used, and what emergent practices did we see in CGNet Swara. And I can't do a whole talk about it right now, but basically what happens is this is what the output of CGNet Swara is still text on a web page. You can click up there on that little play box and hear somebody's original voice, but it still gets manifest in text. And how does impact mostly happen on CGNet Swara? Some journalist reads that CGNet page and turns it into a story that appears on the BBC in Hindi or in English language papers or whatever. But there's this interaction between the voice that comes from the phone, the server, and eventual impact. So I want to just make us think, pull back the curtain for a second and think beyond the handset. It's so easy to say, oh, this handset lets us do citizen journalism. What you actually have is callers who indeed are kind of citizen journalists themselves and do interviews in a style that they've learned by listening to other calls on the system, get kind of grievances and issues and local things injected into the system, which is great. But that doesn't automatically appear on the web page. It gets stored on a server, and they don't know where that server is, but it's stored somewhere. For a while it was near one of my friends, this guy Bill. Bill could tell me where the server is. It's incredibly important stuff to the state of Chhattisgarh is with this coder who lives in Bangalore, which is very strange. The moderator is, if you study journalism, this one's interesting. Shu, this guy, is a former journalist himself, and he plays a very strong editorial role in selecting and queuing what gets onto the system. And Shu is not doing this on his mobile phone. He's doing this sitting in front of a computer, right? And Shu's the guy who's basically playing the editorial role and deciding what messages go out on that website. And then the web visitors are the ones who can kind of check it out and see if it turns into impact or not. And it really does. I mean, there's nice accountability, and there's kind of getting back in the face of bureaucracy that's not serving people's needs in local communities. There's also self-expression, and people sing on this thing. There's all kinds of neat stuff happening. The point for today is if you just try to describe this as a mobile handset thing, you miss the point. So, a few thoughts sort of for discussion, and maybe we'll have a couple moments for questions afterwards, or feedback. The first is, I've been kind of hinting at this. This is from this is a quote by John Pierce that appeared in an article he wrote in this old book by Ithiel de Solapool, which came out in 1977, called The Social Impact of the Telephone. If you can find this book, buy this book, because it'll tell you so much about what we all talk about the social impact of mobile phones. It has nothing to do with mobile phones, but it's a great old book on the sort of sociology of the telephone. And Pierce's point was that we take the network for granted. We spend so much time looking at the handset, we don't see beneath the iceberg. The iceberg is 90% below the surface, to the magic and the power of the network, which is what really is making this communications thing great. So I think now we've got 2 or 3 icebergs that we need to theorize about or be aware of when we're making our assertions about mobile communication in the developing world. We've got the public switch telephone network, which is the fact that you can still call a landline from your phone. And one of the reasons the phone was so great, the mobile handset was so great, is that you could call anybody's phone right from the get-go. Imagine if it had been different and there was just a cell phone connection and there was just a landline connection and those things didn't interconnect. And that's regulators, thank you very much for making it happen in most places in the world. But it made the whole network more valuable right out of the gate. But now I think, as I said earlier on, I think the fact that sort of connection to make voice calls was so successful to the tune of 6 billion connections, that we're risking not understanding how problematic it's going to be as a primary means of accessing the internet. So just bear with me, and this is one of the ones I'm still working on. I think that the sort of the mental model around placing a call is itself miraculous, but we take that one for granted, right? And it's partially because we tunnel through that iceberg, we tunnel through that chaos, but we can imagine somebody on the back end picking up the handset, saying hello, and having a roughly parallel experience. And we get over that pretty quickly, and we treat it as a natural thing to talk to somebody on the phone. What we are now also asking people to do is read and write to mysterious databases that sit in countries and in cities that we don't even know where they are. Where's your Facebook profile? And we kind of take that for granted too, but we're literally asking, this is the digital literacy question from your talk earlier today, about asking people with not a whole lot of experience with these data sets to write to them and read from them. via the phone, it's actually the hardest thing to do relative to what you would be able to do if you had access to a PC, is a tall order. We're getting there because designers and information architects and things make that experience as easy as they can, but they're still there are limits to that, and it's still hard. And Walmart's better at it than that guy with the lemon stand. So let me put this one other way, and this is the second point for discussion, then I'll just do some closing thoughts. And this is a quote from Steve Jobs. It's a kind of a mangled quote because he did it at a workshop. It was public. So the quote I found in the journalists was itself with all these ellipses and things in it. So I'm not aggressively contorting it, but he said, this is about our PC's dead. He said, when we, meaning the US, was an agrarian nation, all cars were trucks because that's what you needed on the farms. And PCs, said Steve, are going to be like trucks. They're going to be around, but only 1 out of X people will need them. Fine and good, and I appreciate that. And indeed, a lot of my day when I just want to, listen to music or take some photos or something like that, I also don't need a truck. I don't need, a major $1,000 laptop or workstation or something to get my work done. But sometimes I do. And I think that for ICTD and mobiles for development in particular, we have to take a sort of a little bit of a more of a political or a power lens on that and literally start asking who owns the trucks, right? And who's got access to the trucks and what are those trucks used for? And I think that what's happening, this is a little bit playful again, but so this is like, have you ever seen ratings like this where you can kind of do like a half thing, like the ones with the dot in are not great, but they're okay at something, and so different media you could think about, or different platforms have different sets of affordances on on purpose. And if you have access to everything, you're lucky, and you just toggle between the one that's right for your mode. And when you want to write a long email, you wait till you get home. When you want to write a short email, you do it on the bus. And the problem is only when you don't have access to many of these things and you load up everything onto that $50 handset because that's your only device. And so Innocent did really well at coordination. He could get customers using his basic phone. And I love the phones for that. Citizen journalists can do propagation and can get their stories out on basic phones, with the help behind the scenes. And I love phones for that too. So I'm not trying to tell you that handsets don't have an enormous kind of, potentiality to change the world and all the sorts of stories we're talking about. It's great, it's important things. But it's the experience of those students still going to the telecenters that signal these things about what are the things that you still need the truck for, to use Jobs' metaphor. And I think it's about production, and I think it's about co-creation and things that the phones haven't necessarily been optimized for. The phones are getting really good at consumption and propagation, not great at production. So this becomes a case where we have to sort of merge a bunch of literatures, and you can talk about, get theory back into it a bit. I mean, Castell's ideas about, where power and value is created in an informational society, where it's the information itself and the networks itself, rather than the material goods where power is located. There's a sort of a sometimes utopian, sometimes geeky, sometimes just spot-on literature about co-creation and the Wikipediation of the world, and production and usage being combined into pro-usage, and that stuff's really touches us here. And then the issues of affordances and digital divide, and rejecting the idea of just a binary divide that's closed now, and rather replacing that with a set of affordances and a sort of a spectrum of access that I think we may have some challenges left on the production side. So 3 slides left. Is that okay? We're just about done. Thank you for guys bearing with me. So on the theory side, what do we do with this? Well, one is, I used this quote a few years ago in a paper about sort of, and I'm not the first person to say this, about disaggregating the artifact. And this has been a talk about disaggregating, getting beyond the handset, and specifically with relation to mobile data. So when we use the words cell phone or mobile phone in research, what do we mean? And it's a moving target, even in the developing world. Are we talking about just voice calls, person-to-person SMS? Are we talking about SMS-based services that are touching servers somewhere? Are we talking about apps? Are we talking about the World Wide Web? And our theory about mobiles isn't really good at all the stuff that's after voice calls, I'd say. It's okay with SMS. And by the way, what do we mean by internet? And this is as much a comment to the internet and society people who aren't necessarily coming to this conference. about all this kind of utopian thing about everybody's going to be a co-producer and have equal access because they've all got access, I think it's an open question. When we talk about all these constraints of using a handset as your only kind of digital device, we understand that stuff pretty well. So we've got things to say to that broader kind of internet society literature. So in closing on theory, to theorize the handset, account for these icebergs, account for the things that are behind the curtain that are invisible, the data that lives on servers, the code and the experiences that people architect to manipulate that data and make it harder or easier, and that they're running in this thing called the cloud. So the cloud is coming even to basic handsets. Even if you use a voice response system, I can get there on a $10 phone right now. And in practice, there are things we can do right now. It just doesn't have to be just a critical exercise to make this thing a little bit better. The first is we have to make the mobile internet more sympathetic to prepay users. And this isn't just reducing the tariffs, but it's doing things like caching. It's like making negotiations to make certain parts of the mobile internet free. Wikipedia has agreed with Orange to make it free to use your Orange network cell phone to get to Wikipedia anywhere in North Africa, which is it's some combination of sort of public subsidy and agreement, but it's good for the world for people to be able to get to Wikipedia for free, and it represents some empathy. But meanwhile, in addition to Orange, you've got Facebook negotiating one-off deals with a bunch of carriers around the world for Facebook Zero to make Facebook is free for 90 days, just enough to give you a taste, and off you go onto Facebook. But price is such a gateway that we need to really empathize, and if we want the internet to be as inclusive as possible on the mobile channel, we've got to pay attention to price. There's the issue of sort of production affordances on sub-$50 devices, storage somebody was mentioning earlier, and battery life, and better keyboards that if you pay $500, your touchscreen keyboard works pretty well, particularly if you're writing in English. There's a bunch of other things you can do to make it easier to write and produce, maybe cut video and those sorts of things, the stuff of production on a mobile. And then there's issues where we can really push on that with things like natural user interfaces like voice and gesture, and multilingual support to get around these issues that the net is really better if you're quite proficient in English still, and this only gets amplified if we're talking about mobile phones. And then don't ignore, this is the last point about repertoire, don't ignore the alternatives and the complements elsewhere in the system. We've been so enthusiastic, World Bank, et cetera, about the mobiles that we've taken our eye off of production a little bit and some other things. And PCs and tablets are great in a number of ways. And these other things that people may want to do to really participate in the full spectrum of things you can do in the informational society may be done better if we're using devices in combination as opposed to simply the mobile phone. So my last slide, in summary. Mobile data is everywhere. This means even the global south. 85% of the world lives under a signal right now. That doesn't mean 85% of the world uses the mobile internet, but 85% of the world lives under a signal, and that's going to climb even higher. Let's reconfigure the ideals around ICT-D and M4D theory and practice to ensure, or promote anyway, that the smarter phone becomes as inclusive and pro-poor as the basic phone has been. It's a hard thing to do. That's why I say ideals. We're not going to get it entirely right, but we can help. About those trucks, we should have a special focus, I think, on renewing and refining a commitment to technologies and policies that enable production, informational production, and participation by as many people as possible across multiple devices, not just creating things to consume content. And finally, I think that the rise of the mobile-centric internet use as an experience that hundreds of millions or billion people will have, particularly in the global south, demands a reconciliation between the mobile communication studies and internet studies right now. And I love events like this, but we need to be engaging with people who are making assertions about what the internet is, because the internet is increasingly experienced through a mobile phone, Facebook itself, and all sorts of things. So we've got things to say on that. That's it for today, and I really thank you guys for your patient attention. Thanks.